Even without considering this formidable competition, our own strategy raised some daunting implications. What we had done so far to unify IBM, reorganizing around industries rather than countries, consolidating our marketing, and changing our compensation plans, had been relatively easy to accomplish. What lay ahead, devising a strategy for a fundamentally new world and reinventing an encrusted culture from the DNA out, that was a challenge of a vastly different order. I asked myself, how did I get into this? Is it an impossible task? It would be hard to say no with a straight face, even to my closest colleagues. I could see clearly what the remaining 4 years of my contract would look like. We had a chance to grow. Maybe we could take on and displace a few competitors in some segments. But lead the industry? That mountain looked too high to climb. And if I set that task as the goal, I stood a very good chance of failing, very visibly. I walked more, thought more, and the clouds began to clear. Yes, those were daunting obstacles, but wasn't that why I'd come here? Didn't this make the challenge that much more intriguing? And wasn't it worth the risk? If we didn't aspire to leadership, one thing was clear: the company would never really come together, never really achieve its potential. And that would be a shame. I recalled the comment Jim Burke had made about IBM's being a national treasure. In fact, Burke was just one of several people who had expressed that phrase to me. Shortly after the announcement of my appointment, I had run into Joshua Lederberg, a research geneticist and Nobel laureate, on the street in Manhattan. I knew him from the board of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. "You're going to IBM," he'd said to me. I'd said I was. "It's a national treasure," he'd said. "Don't screw it up." At the time, I thought this reverence was a bit over the top. Up to that point in my career, I had dealt mostly with businesspeople who were motivated by basically two things: money and power. And we were in the midst of one of the most swashbuckling eras in the history of commerce. In contrast, when I got to IBM, I felt as though I had entered a time warp and gone back to the 1950s. The fact was, IBM had grown on me. I had come to understand what Jim Burke and Dr. Lederberg meant. The corporation was important not only in what it did for customers and governments and universities, and not only for what it invented, impressive and meaningful as those accomplishments were. It was also important for the kind of corporate behavior to which it aspired. IBMers were battered, bruised, and confused. Many had retreated into a self-protective shell, but underneath that, they were still motivated by a genuine love of their company and of doing the right thing. You could make fun of IBM all you liked. Our competitors certainly did. But for issues that really mattered, when it was a question of national defense, or our children's health, or serious scientific discovery, IBM was essential. Forgive my hyperbole, but in an industry increasingly run by mad scientists and Pied Pipers, we needed to succeed. I hadn't left consulting and gone into management just to be Mr. Fix-It or simply for the pleasure of getting into the game. More than anything, I like to win. But the issue here went beyond winning. For the first time in my career, I was in a position to make a different kind of mark, to help something truly important live and thrive. I wasn't going to walk away from that. As I headed back to our family's beach house, I began to feel intense excitement. I told myself, we could actually pull this off. So the die was cast. I'd concluded it was insufficient for me, personally and for the institution, to call it a day after battling back from IBM's near-death experience. We were going to take our best shot at making the long climb back to industry leadership. Heading into IBM, I would have bet large sums of money that these frenetic early months of decision-making and action-taking to stabilize the patient would be the hardest work of my professional career. I would have bet wrong. It had been difficult, even painful. The issues, however, were reasonably obvious, the problems were easy to parse, and the remedial actions were straightforward. Now, after nearly a decade of subsequent work and with the benefit of a little distance from the day-to-day existence of the CEO, I can say without hesitation that what came next was far more difficult. If nothing else, those first 12 to 18 months at least had the benefit of adrenaline-stoked intensity, many highs, an equal number of lows, but never time to celebrate one or dwell on the other because we were literally in a situation in which every minute counted. What I'd come to realize during this second walk on the beach was that after all that initial work had been completed, we'd gotten ourselves only to the starting line. The sprint was over. Our marathon was about to begin. While the issue was no longer as stark as the demise or survival of IBM, the ultimate fate of this national treasure was far from settled. What would happen through the second half of the 1990s would determine whether IBM was merely going to be one more pleasant, safe, comfortable, but fairly innocuous participant in the information technology industry, or whether we were once again going to be a company that mattered. The outcome of that race has been abundantly documented. By 1997 we'd declared the IBM turnaround complete. Inside the company, we were talking openly about getting back on top and once again setting the agenda for our industry, aspirations that, when we began, would have seemed excessively ambitious at best, delusional at worst. Before I stepped away in March 2002, we were number one in the world in IT services, hardware, enterprise software, excluding PCs, and custom-designed, high-performance computer chips. See Chapter 16. The IBM team had staged comebacks in multiple markets, where we'd previously been getting sand kicked in our faces. We'd revamped and reinvigorated traditional product lines, launched new growth businesses, and jettisoned several others that were vestiges of the earlier era. At a higher level, we had articulated and then led the future direction of the industry, a future in which business and technology would not be separate tracks but intertwined, and a future in which the industry, in a remarkable about-face, would be driven by services, rather than hardware or software products. We'd coined the term e-business and played a leadership role in defining what was going to matter and what wasn't in a networked world. The IBM workforce increased in size by about 100,000 people. Our stock split twice and increased in value by 800%. Our technical community ushered in a new golden age of IBM research and development and earned more United States patent awards than any company for 9 years running. We even connected supercomputing with pop culture when a machine named Deep Blue defeated chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov. In short, once we got back on our feet, shook off the stigma of squandering a seemingly unassailable leadership position, and decided that just maybe our best days were yet to come, the IBM team responded magnificently, just as it had through even the darkest days early in the transformation. Point 1. What follows in the next part of this book, the strategy section, is a change of pace. I could not provide, nor would you want to read, an event-by-event or month-by-month recounting of all that was done to effect the strategic redirection of IBM. My intent is to provide a summary description of the most important strategic changes. Some can be declared successes, others remain works in progress. In each case, what I've included are the moves that were either such distinct departures from IBM's prior direction that they can be considered bet the company changes, or those that were so diametrically opposed to the existing culture that they were at great risk of being brought down by internal resistance. Also, I'll point out that I leave my successor much unfinished business. A number of our strategies are not yet fully deployed, others remain to be defined. More important, the cultural transformation of IBM's formerly successful and deeply entrenched culture, our single most critical and difficult task, will require constant reinforcement or the company could yet again succumb to the arrogance of success. Part 2. Strategy 12. A brief history of IBM. Before we talk about how the new would be helpful to understand, in broad brush strokes, IBM was built, I think it. How IBM became the great company most of us revered up until the early 1990s, and what contributed, at least in my view, to its breathtaking decline. The company's origins go back to the early 20th century, when Thomas J. Watson, Sr., combined several small companies to form the International Business Machines Corporation. For the first half of the century, IBM's business machines embraced a broad and largely unrelated lineup of commercial products, everything from scales and cheese slicers to clocks and typewriters. Of prime importance was the fact that IBM was a pioneer in computation long before most people talked about computers. The company's early electromechanical tabulation and punch card devices introduced computation to business, academia, and government. For example, IBM scored a huge win when it was selected by the United States federal government to help start up and automate the Social Security system in the 1930s. Inventing the mainframe like Henry Ford, John D. Rockefeller, and Andrew Carnegie, Thomas Watson was a powerful, patriarchal leader who left an imprint on every aspect of his company. His personal philosophies and values, hard work, decent working conditions, fairness, honesty, respect, impeccable customer service, jobs for life defined the IBM culture. The paternalism engendered by Watson would come to be both an asset and, long past his lifetime, a challenge for the company. However, there's no question that it made IBM highly appealing to a post-depression labor force yearning for job security and a fair deal.